And good morning. Hey, how you doing, Jimmy? Good morning. It's good to see all of you this morning. We want to welcome those of you from Henry Street today. You're our honored guests, and we appreciate so much you being here. Before we get going, though, we want to remember we've got quite a few people on our prayer list. I'm going to refer you to the prayer list because of time constraints here and the announcements after services. You'll pick up on everybody, but pick up a prayer list and lift those folks up in prayer. We know we've got a lot of people who are struggling right now physically and emotionally and spiritually, and so we definitely want to keep them in our prayers. As I said, we want to welcome Henry Street. We need some more, Eugene? Okay, has everybody got a handout? I have some handouts for today's lesson. And for those of you who have not been here, I'm not going to be able to bring you up to speed. I will cover a few things that we've touched on in the background. But before we get into our class this morning, why don't we have a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this privilege we have this morning of gathering here in this place and studying your holy word. Father, we know that you are magnificent and you're grand and you're glorious, but this book that you have given to John, your servant, the book of Revelation, we pray for wisdom and insight as we study this, and grant us understanding that we can use in our daily lives. Father, we pray so much for those who are our congregation who are struggling right now, and we ask you to wrap them up in your love and reach down your healing hand and take care of them. Be with us here at Rainbow as we're at Henry Street as we labor in your kingdom, and help us to always shine as bright lights in this darkened world. This is our prayer in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All righty. See if I can get this thing to working this morning. There we go. Boy, we're in the book of Revelation. We are in scene number 4. And for those of you who are just here, I'm just going to recap just real quickly. There are several different ways of approaching the book of Revelation. You have the preterist view, which believes that everything took place in AD 70. That's an early date on the book of Revelation, except the last 2 chapters. But then you also have the full preterist view, which says everything in Revelation happened in 70 AD. So that's one view. You have the historical view, which believes that it is a history of mankind and that it is written in a chronological order. And it covers things like the rise of the papacy, Roman Catholicism, Islam, the Crusades, and it goes all the way through history up until the end of time and the second advent of Christ. Then you have the futurist view, which believes that everything, even including the 7 churches, each church is a picture of the church in different ages or different stages of history. And well, it's kind of weird. But that's the way they view that. The book of Revelation is filled with speculation. You've got people like Hal Lindsey with his late great Planet Earth, and John Walvoord from Dallas Theological Seminary, who have come out with the idea that there's going to be a rapture, which a fellow by the name of Darby brought out back in the 1800s. The church is going to be raptured. There will be a 1,000-year reign on the earth. There will be a big battle of Armageddon and all this other stuff in the future. And Christ is going to reign here on the earth for 1,000 years. Idealist view, which is everything is just in principles. Now, we've been trying to go through the Bible and pick out and let the Bible interpret. And we are now over in chapters 13. And to bring you up to speed on what we've done thus far, the way that we're viewing the book of Revelation, it is not set in chronological order. It doesn't go from point A to point B. As a matter of fact, if it does that, you wind up having too many ends of the world. And so we're looking at this as being scenes set upon one another. And so while the trumpets are sounding the warnings, we have judgment going on. What is a trumpet warning for one person is a judgment for another. And we've gone through everything up until the point of chapter 12, where chapter 12 makes a little shift in what it's doing. Instead of looking at things from the human perspective, it looks at things from a cosmic perspective, what's going on in the background. Now, last week, we got into get over here to it, as I said, scene 4, the drama of history. That's how far we've gone. It's going to be fast and furious the next few weeks because of the simple reason that time constraints is going to be tough. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get through all of it, but we're going to do our best. Last week we met a woman and the dragon there in chapter 12 of Revelation. And we were wanting to know something about this book. It says here in chapter 12, verse 1, a great sign appeared in heaven, and a woman clothed, now I want you to underline this, with the sun, the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head, appeared to John. Now we were wondering just exactly who is this woman, because this woman is pregnant. She gives birth to a child, and the child is snatched up to God in heaven. And she is carried off into the wilderness to be protected while the serpent's coming after her, and she's taken care of for 1,260 days. And so who is this woman that we're talking about here? Well, in the imagery, it comes to us from the book of Genesis. And if you'll remember a young fellow by the name of Joseph, Joseph was a young guy who was the baby apple of his daddy's eye. And Joseph had some dreams. And over in Genesis, the 37th chapter, verse 9 through 11, he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this your dream you had? Will your brother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down on the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this in mind. Now I want you to remember, the dream was the sun, the moon, and the stars, and Jacob said, is it me, your mama, and your brothers? All right, that's the imagery. Jacob, Rachel, and the 11 brothers constitute what we know as Israel. That's what comes into existence. And so this woman that we're looking at here, like I said, look at the big picture. The woman that we're looking at here is the physical Israel as we start off, okay? And if you look at the physical Israel, over in the book of Numbers chapter 1, you have the 12 tribes listed: Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. But then there's also a shift. And the shift is, after this woman is born, it takes on a different flavor. We have the spiritual Israel. Same Israel, two different aspects. Because this Israel constitutes all those whom God hath called, whether it be through the line of Jacob and Abraham and those promises. Those of us who are Gentile have now been added. We are now the seed of Abraham. We are now in there, and we constitute the spiritual Israel. And if you look in Revelation 7, that's what we're talking about, because you see some differences. You have Reuben, Simeon, Levi has been added. You have Judah, Dan has been taken out. Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph has been added, and Ephraim's taken out, Manasseh and Benjamin. And so we have two different lists, one of the physical Israel, one of the spiritual Israel. All right, so when we look at this woman, we see physical and spiritual, same thing from two different perspectives. Over the book of Hosea chapter 2, verse 19 and 20, I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord, which we do. We are the bride of Christ. We are the spiritual Israel from a different perspective. And so that's who this woman is that we saw in chapter 12, all right? But then we get to the verse 3, it says, then another sign appeared in heaven, and it was an enormous red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth, and that dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child. Now, this dragon, we covered him pretty well last week, but I want to touch him again. This dragon that we're looking at is identified in chapter 12, verse 9. It tells us this great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. So we have no worries about who this dragon is. We know without a shadow of a doubt the dragon is Satan. Well, why all the heads? All right? What are we talking about with the heads? He's got 7 of them. And the 7 heads, the word head there represents worldly governments. It comes from the word kephal, which literally means head or source. And so this idea of the head, the imagery of head all throughout the Bible, deals with the governments or rulers and what have you. So We're talking about the 7, which is the idea of completeness or the reality of it. Satan, in reality, is behind all world governments or the completeness of governments. That's who we're talking about here. Then, well, there it is. He's source of all man-made governments. Now, what about Romans 13? God ordained civil authority. Yes, God did, and he had covenant with them. He says, you protect my people. Now, when you don't do that, you've broken the covenant. When you don't do that, you're no longer mine. Guess who you belong to? All right? So Satan is a driving force behind man-made civil governments. Then we looked at the 10 horns that he had, and these ideas of horns, get over here to it, picture, if you will, a bull. You know, a bull with the great big horns. I used to ride bulls when I was a kid, and we stayed away from those horns if we could. But a horn on a water buffalo or a wildebeest or something like that, that can do a great deal of damage to, you know, predators like lions and tigers and what have you. And so the idea is the power, the strength behind that. They're emblems of dominion and glory. That's what this idea is. And the idea of the number 10, if I get down here to it, come on. The idea of number 10 is also a number that views as completeness. Kind of like 7 and 3 and 12 and what have you. But down at the bottom, the last sentence, it signifies testimony, law, responsibility, and the completeness of order. And so when you see he's the head of civil governments, the completeness of the entire order is what we're talking about here. There isn't a civil government on this planet that's separate and apart from God that Satan isn't in control of. All right? Bottom line. All right. He has the power and dominion over worldly governments. It's complete. 7 crowns. And of course, the crowns are diadems. They're crowns of authority and power. And the 7 means completeness or reality. That's the reality of the situation. He is in control. 1 John 5:19. We know we're children of God, but the whole world is under the control of the evil one. Matthew, the 4th chapter, Satan looks at Jesus and says, guess what? If you'll bow down and worship me, I'm going to give you all the kingdoms of the world. How can he do that? They were his. Right? Over in Hebrews 2, everything ought to be subjected to Jesus, but not yet. We don't see it. It's not yet. It's going to come, but not everybody's in subjection to him because we have people of God and the people of the world. And the people of the world are following this guy. Okay? He has that usurped authority. Then the dragon is enraged at the woman, goes off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep the commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. That means you. Satan is after you. When Peter says that Satan is like a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he can devour, he means that. All right? Satan wants you. He's already got the world, and he's coming for you. And so we say, how's he going to do that? How is Satan going to come after us? Well, as we get into this section of the drama, we see that there's a new beast in chapter 13. In chapter 13, this is what we call the first vision. This section has 7 visions in it. This is the first one. It's 13:1. Long reading, so stay with me. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea, and it had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on its horns, and each head had a blasphemous name. Kind of looks like the dragon, doesn't he? I mean, you know, he's got 7 heads and 10 horns instead of 10 crowns and everything. He's kind of like the dragon, kind of family resemblance there maybe. But the beast I saw resembled a leopard, but it had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power, his throne, and his great authority. Now I want you to get that. The power gave him his power, his authority. So behind civil government, you have Satan's authority, or behind this beast, you have Satan's authority, Satan's power, which is a driving force. Okay? His great authority. The hands of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with a wonder, and it followed the beast. Now the idea of a fatal wound, it's been slain, but it came back to life. That's what we're talking about here. Okay. Verse 4. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies to exercise its authority for 42 months. Now remember that 42-month idea, okay? It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Okay, well, whoever has ears, this is the warning, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Okie dokie. What a beast. You talk about controversy. This beast has been called everything. I don't have time to go into all of them this morning. But this beast brings up a whole bunch of questions. And when we look at these questions, we have the little guy on the left over here. He's saying, you know what, that looks like the dragon we just heard about over in chapter 12 of Daniel. Of Revelation. No, excuse me. Yeah, chapter 12. I'll get it right here in a minute. That dragon that we just talked about, said this beast looks a lot like him. There's a lot of similarities between the beast of the sea and the dragon that we know is Satan. But then, the little guy says, yeah, but verses 1 and 2 remind me of Daniel's vision. Remember Daniel? All right? Now, Daniel, back over in Daniel, the 7th chapter, has a vision of some fantastic beasts. And this is part of the controversy that we have here. In verse 4 of chapter 7 in the book of Daniel, it says, the first was like a lion. Got that? That first beast is like a lion. It had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were tore off and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human being was given to it. And we don't have to worry about that because later on in the interpretation of it, we find out that he's talking about the Babylonian Empire. All right? This is the first in the section of his dream. Daniel is living in this empire where this beast here is ruling. It's the Babylonian Empire. Verse 5 says, there before me was a second beast which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides and it had 3 ribs in its mouth. And between its teeth it was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. Once again, we don't have to worry about who this is. We know who it is because this is the Medo-Persian Empire. You remember Cyrus and Darius and what have you, those kings? These are the ones that kind of took over Babylon. Okay? Next beast. We find in verse 6, it says, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. Once again, we don't have to worry because this is the Grecian Empire. It started with Alexander. And this is who takes over, right? But then we get to verse 7. And he says, after that, in my vision night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the others. Yes, it was. But we know who that is. Because in the succession, we're talking about the Roman Empire. Okay? So we've gone from Babylon to Medo-Persian to Grecians to Rome. And when we look at this, we find out that people are equating Daniel's 4th beast with the beast of the sea. In other words, this 7-headed beast that we see over here is the 4th beast in Daniel's vision. However, there's a problem. Excuse me. What's the problem? Well, doesn't look anything like him. All right, number one. But there's more of a difference to it. Now, a lot of people say that we're talking about imperial Rome when we look at this beast in chapter 13. And to an extent, that's true. All right? But what about these 7 heads? How do they get that it's imperial Rome? Well, these 7 heads, they say, represent emperors. And the emperors start with a fellow by the name of Julius. Then you have Augustus and Tiberius and Caligula and Claudia and Nero and Vespasian. Later on, you're going to find out where 5 of these are gone and 1 is, and 1 has not yet come. And they kind of tie all this together. But they say that this head that had the mortal wound is this young man right here, Nero. He had the mortal wound. Nero did. He killed himself, all right? after he set fire to Rome and what have you, and said it was after him and everything. He killed himself and said the world's losing a great musician. But anyway, thought of himself as a rock star. But everybody associates him with the head that has the mortal wound and comes back to life. There's even a doctrine that goes along with that. It's called Nero Redivivus. And what that means is the resurrection of Nero, all right? And the belief was that Nero was going to be raised from the dead, or he was going to be reincarnated in the form of another Roman emperor, all right? Problem is, Nero is dead and buried. As a matter of fact, he's in the mausoleum of Domiti Ahenobarbari, I guess is how you say it. It's a big, that's a $40 word. We don't even know it, okay? But that's where he's at, okay? He's still dead. Now, here's another problem. So we say that Nero can't be that head because he didn't come back to life, right? Well, then you've got Vespasian who comes into being. Now, Vespasian is later on, and he's pretty mean. I mean, he really persecutes Christians and what have you. And they say, well, that's got to be Vespasian. And so we're talking about the Roman Empire. Well, we got a little problem here. Because you see, Vespasian wasn't the emperor after Nero. As a matter of fact, you had 3 emperors after Nero. You had Galba, Otha, and Vitalis. And the idea is that it doesn't fit to the chronology or the reality of who the emperors were. Okay? So what we have here, instead of 7 heads, we got 10 of them. And it doesn't fit. Let me show you this. Revelation 13:3. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. Circle the whole world. Okay? Revelation 13:7. It was given authority over every tribe, every people, every language, and every nation. Okay? 13:8. All the inhabitants of the earth. How many? All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Now there's 3 things there that you need to pick up on. The whole world was filled with wonder. Every tribe, people, language, and every nation, all the inhabitants of the earth. Those key things there. I want you to look at the size of Rome. Was Rome big? You betcha. It was a big empire. It surrounded the Mediterranean Sea. They had about 200 million people in subjection. That sounds like a lot of folks, doesn't it? That was a bunch of folks because it encompassed all this area around the Mediterranean Sea. But I want you to put this into perspective. If you put it into perspective, Rome is a dot compared to the rest of the world. Because over here in China, you have one city, the Chennai, city of Chennai, has 250,000 people in it. It's one city. You're talking China at the place of over 200 million people at that time. You've got over here the Kushan Empire, that's 1,500,000 square miles of people. You have the Parthenon Empire, which Rome never beat, never defeated. You have Asia, you have Europe, you have the Germans up there, which Rome never got a hold of to whip and subject them. You had the Celts, you had the Kingdom of Abyssinia there in Africa, you had Arabia, you had Perfuma, and that's not counting the rest of the world off of those continents. So, all the world, every nation were subjected. Did Rome subject every nation? Did the entire world worship Rome? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies to exercise authority for how long? 42 months. What's 42 months? Well, when we looked at that 42 months last week, it's 1,260 days. Remember, the good side was 1,260 days. The church taken care of, the woman taken care of, 1,260 days. The evil side, the beast, and the prophet talked for 42 months. And he goes over to Daniel, talking about the church age, times and a half times. That's how long it was going to last. And really what we're talking about here is the entire Christian age. Okay? 42 months that he is going to blaspheme God. He's going to have that authority for the entire Christian age. Rome didn't do that. As a matter of fact, Babylon didn't do that. Medo-Persia didn't do that. Alexander didn't do that. Russia didn't do that. Right? Hitler didn't do that. The United States is not going to do that. We're not going to be here that long. I heard, or the beast rather, I saw, did what? It resembled a leopard. It wasn't a leopard, but it resembled a leopard. But it was different than the leopard over in Daniel, because Daniel had 4 heads over there, and it was a leopard with 4 heads. Here, it resembles a leopard, but it doesn't look anything like a leopard because it's got feet like those of a bear. All right, so it's got the head of a leopard, feet of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. And we're talking about one being, one creature, one entity. What are we referring to here? I'm going to suggest to you, John has taken the 4 images from Daniel and blended them into one, not to show one simple form government that we can identify as being Rome or as being the Catholic Church or as being whatever. He's saying this is an amalgamation of all governments into one image. You follow what I'm saying? All governments are represented by this one image. So what we have here is that man-made governments soon become the instruments of Satan. Even our own country. We don't like to hear that, do we? We don't like, because the United States, well, let's face it, it's the best one bunch right now. Out of all the governments of the world, I'd rather be here than any place else. But here's getting tough, isn't it? As a matter of fact, it's getting tough for Christians. You can't refuse, because of your conscience, to bake a cake for a group of homosexual people who want to get married, because you're going to lose everything you've got. You cannot utilize prayer in schools without getting in trouble. Even a football team can't take a knee without the coach getting fired, you know, for prayer. But you can take a knee for anything else, but you can't do it for prayer in school. As a matter of fact, you want God out of your schools, according to Madeline Murray O'Hare. Let's just get her out. And while we're doing that, let's just go over to England, where they could take an 18-month-old baby and say, we're going to starve it to death. We don't care if it's going to go over here to England, go over to Italy, where they'll adopt him and try to do cures for him. We determined he's going to die, and that little child died this week. They starved him to death. Wouldn't let the parents take it. Have a friend of mine over in Georgia. His uncle slipped and fell, broke his hip. Went to the hospital. They put him in a room for a little while, got him out in about 3 days and gave him a cane. Said that he's not a candidate for a hip replacement because he's on Medicare and Medicaid. You see, little things like that just kind of sneak up on us, and then they ball up. And homosexuality is being advocated and taken. When I was a kid, it was against the law. It was sodomy laws that took care of all that. But nowadays, you know, a preacher, if he refuses to perform a wedding ceremony, we had to, which by the way, y'all might think about this, put up a homosexual policy as to how you're going to handle that so it'll be in effect before somebody ever comes. Because they can come in, and if they don't want to, if they have the mind to, they can sue the church. Okay? What about this head covered with a mortal wound come back to life? What are we talking about here? Revelation 17, verse 8, the inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished when they see the beast, because, I want you to get this, it once was, now is not, and yet will come. What are we talking about here? This beast was. What is the meaning of the image of the beast from the sea? If it constitutes the image of all governments amalgamated into one beast, if we can look at it in history and see. You've heard of fascism. Remember that? Adolf Hitler. Germany. You had Mussolini, who was a fascist in Italy. Franco in Spain. Salazar in Portugal, I think it was. And they were all here, and they are all come, and they've all gone. Guess what? Syria, Bulgaria, Armenia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Denmark, Greece, Spain, Ukraine, Netherlands, and Hungary. They're all fascist states. It was here, it's gone, it's back. A republic. It was there in Rome. It's gone. Now it's back. Started off with Texas, the United States. Okay? Communism. What's communism? Well, that's a form of government where everybody takes care of each other. So, how about Native American tribes? They did. You're talking about tribal governments? Yeah. Okay, I'm talking about that. But I'm also talking about Russia and China and all of those things. Communism, all different forms. Socialism. That's just communism under a different term. All right? It's all there. So what he's saying is this beast represents all governments, and that head represents they're here, they're gone, and they come back. What goes around comes around. That's what we're looking at here. Because it once was, now it's not, and yet will come. Okay? So when we look at the beast from the sea, governments come, governments go, governments will return. In one form or another, we're going to repeat it. And that old saying that if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, that's a truism. But yet mankind hasn't seen that the only government that is viable, that will last forever and ever, is the rule of God in the hearts of men. That's it. Anything else is a corruption. The beast from the sea, he's Satan's perversion of society. Then we come up on the beast from the earth. Now, I don't have time to cover all of them, all right? I'll have to get you next week on all of this. But it says, then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth, not the sea this time, the earth. But it has two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs and even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. That's the one I don't have time to cover today, all right? Because of the signs it was given power to perform on the behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or in their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, or his man's number, depending on what version you got. That number is 666. We're going to have to cover him next week. What is this beast from the land? What is he? Some people say he is the imperial cult. And the imperial cult, if you'll remember all the Caesars they got together, they were believed to be mortal manifestations of the divine, and they were to be worshipped as gods. They're not the first ones to do that. As a matter of fact, Nebuchadnezzar thought he was God, okay? Pharaoh thought he was a god. Who is this Yahweh that I should bow down and worship him, you know? He believed he was God. As a matter of fact, rulers of countries believed in divine authority. The King of England, King James, the guy who put together a lot of Bibles, he believed that he had been given divine authority by God to be who he was and where he was and what have you, and he could speak in God's behalf, as kind of like the Pope does, ex cathedra. But, you know, King James did that. You have just a whole raft of people who thought that they were gods. Tribal leaders thought they were gods. In World War II, what's his name, Hirohito? Who was the emperor? Tojo? Tojo, wasn't it? Can't remember now. The emperor of Japan. People worshipped him. Shintoism. They were bowing down because they thought he was a god. Now, that's not too far removed from what's going on here in first century Rome. Some emperors made worship of themselves mandatory. In other words, you have to bow down and worship me. And that created a problem for both Jews and Christians. So it's the second beast, the emperor cult, to an extent, right? But not only. I saw the second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. Now what we have here is an image of the Lamb of God. It looks peaceful. It looks like it's doing good. It looks like it's going to give you everything you need, but it speaks like a dragon. Okay? Boom. He's counterfeit. Everything God does, Satan tries to counterfeit. When they give us the good news of the gospel, Satan comes along and says, I've got a better way. I'm going to free you up. You don't have to believe in God. Isn't that what he told Eve? She said, what about that tree? He says, it looks good, you know. Go ahead and have some. She said, no, God said we can't touch it or eat anything from it. It's going to die. Satan said, is he still telling you that same old lie? All you got to do is eat of it, and then you're going to be like God. Whoa. And you're not going to need anybody to tell you right from wrong. You can do what you want to do, be what you want to be, act like you want to act. Nobody's going to touch you. So she did. Isn't that what socialism does? Isn't that the way we're raising children today in our schools, in our colleges? I mean, after all, you got to have a safe place in college now because of the things going on in the world, right? You got to have a petting farm. You've got to have all these various things. Government's going to take care of you. It's all counterfeit, my friend. You want peace in life? You come through Jesus Christ, not the beast from the sea. Two horns like a lamb. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived all the inhabitants of the earth. The second beast was given power to breathe to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. Don't have time. Let me just say it this way. The beast from the land is Satan's perversion of Christianity. Could it be an imperial cult? Yeah, it could be the imperial cult. Worship Caesar, you know. Could it be some of the cults of the first century? Sure. Worship Dionysus. Worship Mithra. Worship Cybele. You know, worship all these false gods. Could be today. You know, worship Buddha. Worship Islam. Or, you know, worship the God of Islam, okay? Worship like Jewish people do. Worship like Catholicism does. Worship like Jehovah's Witnesses do. You know, do what you want to do. Be what you want to be. Some way, subtly, they're going to pervert Christianity. That's what this beast from the sea is representing. Okay? Bottom line. Oops, here we go. A perversion of Christianity. Like I said, don't have enough time to cover all of that. Matter of fact, I got through this quicker than I thought I would. So, I know that this is confusing to a lot of people because we've heard a lot of different things. I heard a lot of different things during my lifetime. And during my lifetime, with Foy Wallace, you know, it's the Roman Catholic Church and what have you, and everything was AD 70. And I love Brother Wallace. But since then, we've had these other discoveries that show us what apocalyptic literature is all about. And if you'll remember, apocalyptic literature asks three questions. God, where are you? Chapter 4, God's on his throne. God, why are things as they are? He gives us the four horsemen. He blows the trumpets. He gives us those warnings. He pours out the bowls of his wrath. And now he's showing us that things are as they are because of Satan's counterfeits. Everything that you see going on in the world and people blaming God, they ought to be blaming Satan because he's the one behind all the government oppression, all the inequality, all the bad things happening in life. You see that in the beast, and we see that in both of these beasts. One is the driving force for the other. Now, what we're going to see as we go through this, it was the dragon, the beast from the sea, the beast from the land. When they start to fall, well, we'll say the beast from the land is philosophy, okay, that drives this. So when it falls, what happens when the philosophy of the government falls? When it falls, the government falls, Satan loses. Satan, government, philosophy, philosophy, government, Satan. Pyramid. And the cycle continues until Christ comes again. And we're going to see that. Out of time. I appreciate your presence this morning. If you're confused, I'll be glad to talk with you afterwards. Okay, thank you so much.